Hey everyone, thank you so much for the sub. Definitely wasn't planning on streaming while fasting, but wow, for 14 months, thank you, Smos, you're the best. Okay, we have some pretty good odds right now considering it's mid-session, so I mostly wanted to see if they would try their best to sustain the zone around this 12:30, 12:36, 12:48, 1 o'clock period. We do have slightly better odds after 1, and by better odds I mean in terms of clearing 6, 8, 9, 6, 6, 8, 9, 8. And of course this could be moved with news, like that's pretty obvious, but I don't think we had anything scheduled at 1 today. We don't have any auctions or anything like that, so it'll mostly just be based off timing, I guess, and price. Oh, I'm tired this morning. I had these from the last time, so I'm just gonna reset them again. The way it's acting right here, though, tells me that we might get some reductions today and maybe some moves after. I can't believe we actually held core off 67, 68, 67, 70. These were the exact 55-point increments, too, that we talked about. So usually when we move in core to core ratios, you can tend to get a very similar type movement. I think this is a little bit less than that, though, because I think it was closer to 70. So that was really massive support down here, okay, off these ranges. Usually when you move in that kind of threshold, it's around 52 to 55 points. They moved closer to like the 52-point ratio. And then when we looked at the 21.5 ratios, especially off our 68.11 calculated spot, this was pretty obvious that 6,832 was calculated overnight. So the reason why this was so successful is because they came back and brought it to the top of the zone. But that was also a calculated range that we looked at from yesterday when we opened this session here. 68.11 was extremely calculated. So was 68.06. They ended up opening the session today at 68.11, which is partially why I was thinking there's some probabilities that they could stall. This is a 66-point move here to 686, 6877, 6878. And our overnight overheads were 6858, 6866, which you can see here they finally came in tagged 58 just before coming back testing and sustaining our 41, 42 calculated ranges right here. The areas I have highlighted in yellow. This was a really good hold. before taking it higher. We've already broken a 68-point ratio here. So usually core ranges, you work with like 77, 107. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just broke an 88-point range right here. 88 points in range being broken off today's open. I think off lows we've already hit close to 92 points or 94 points. So off lows 107 points, 103 points. That's why I'm thinking there's some odds that they could maybe cap those neutral spots. Okay. But we'll have to see what happens. Like, I feel like these could be some slight overheads, but there's still a lot of time. So core ranges, if someone wants to share these would be off lows. Okay, 107 is closer to like 69.11. And if you remember when I did that 8.5 day mock, 69.11 was the 50% mark, okay? This is off lows, by the way, not off open. And then the 115 is what would take it back to 69.20. Off today's open, we have higher odds of 6922, 6926, etc., etc., etc. So off here, okay. We'll see around these areas here. So 103 would be close to that. 69.14, 69.18. That's why we really have to watch how it reacts around 69.12, 14, 18, because that's actually what's going to tell us if they're going to expand, because that would be expanding off open. Expanding off open is what gives us those odds of like 69.24, 26. And then expanding off the actual session open, so 68.20, that's what gives us odds to get back to our 69.36, 69.33, 69.38. Do you see what I'm saying? If they did a full 128 point reversal, that gives us odds of getting back to the channel, 69.48. I'm not sure if they'll give us this though, like, but there's some odds there. So like getting these reversals off today's open and today's lows would be 6939, okay? Someone wants to write this down, 6939 off 128 points, 6811, real-time open. So yeah, that level is I think it was either off the 60 or the 8 day. I can't remember. I think it was off the, it might have been off of this, and I think what we were doing is we were just measuring, we were measuring this bar right here, right? And then off the highs, that's how we got like these types of ranges in here. I think close to this, like 6906, 6907, 6911. And off the 8 day, it might have actually been off the 8 day. I think it was off the 8 day. So that's why these areas here are such a big overhead too, because we're trying to basically reset these mid odds, and tomorrow's the flip. Does that make sense? So where we close today matters quite a bit in terms of trying to negate this 3-bar down, but also negate an 8.5 day bear flag from forming, which we figured if it gets higher breaks closer to like 69.14, 69.16, okay, then there's some better odds that this can instead fully avoid that and come back and try to retrace like the 69.35, 36, basically come back and nest in the channel. Do you guys see it? And getting back to 6979 would be kind of the bigger push. Something I found really crazy this morning too is, where was it? We had mass expansions. Oh, half of 346 points, so 173 off today's open would be 698,350. That's actually insane. So, and I mentioned it this morning. I'll just copy paste again. So mass expansions for today would be 693,4248. I don't see that happening considering they didn't clear before mid-session. The conditions for that was a minimum they'd have to get over 6888, 6894, and I said before 12. They did tag 6894 before 12 here at my 1148 flip, if you guys can see that, but then they stalled. So these were some reductions. This is when I started finally measuring some reductions. So far we had about 13 points in reductions here. So 13 points in reductions. I figured off of our 9496 is going to be close to that 6907. So 6907, 6908, that's going to be a pretty big overhead. Does that make sense, you guys? Like off these ranges in here, specifically off like 96, 97. It's going to be around 6909, 6907, 6906. And like I said, it makes sense off these 8-day resets because that's also half that range. Okay? Specifically if we're looking back at these points in here. Same with that 6-day. Okay, do you see that? And when we calculated this mid flip yesterday between the 5th and 3rd, and then the 5th and 3rd, and we did the 19th and 3rd, right? When we did a midpoint calculation yesterday, if you guys remember. So I think we said off of the, I think it was off the 19th and the 5th. And this was the reversal bar. This is kind of what started that potential bear flag from forming, okay? And then we said the midpoint between the 5th and the 25th, because the 25th is correlated to the 5th here, okay? So the midpoint of this would be the 3rd bar, which is today. Does that make sense? So this is considered a like a mid flip, okay? And mainly because the mid flip from the 19th to the 3rd would have occurred on the 25th. So it kind of helps offset this. So that makes today a very, very, very important day in terms of sustainment and retracement. Ideally over 60, I would say 6907, 6909 at a minimum. Like, to me that makes sense, but usually we have some odds around this period here, but 115 is going to be the mid-session for today's entire session, so from overnight, but I'm watching closer to 132 and 136 today. Hi, Miss Carrots. Thank you so much. I honestly haven't talked to anyone back home. I haven't even been checking the news, I'm not gonna lie. Because it just almost feels, I don't know, it's like a weird feeling when you're from those countries, but then you live in Canada or the States, because there's nothing that you can even do. So like, I don't even know what, and it's like nothing ever changes. It just gets worse, progressively worse. So I feel like sometimes checking the news just, I don't know. I'm almost better off just like waiting for bad news, I guess, rather than checking it all the time. My dad was telling me yesterday though that there was some missiles going off, but I don't think it was close to our house. I'm just glad my sister and the kids don't live there anymore. I can't believe they even lived there for like 15 years at this point. And they didn't even come back because of like war or anything like that. They came back because of the lira crashing there. So they came back at like a good time, I guess, because they came back right before 2024 and all the bombings started. They came in 2023. But I don't know. I'll message my cousin later today and see what's going on. But my immediate family all lives here now. Like in terms of my parents and my siblings, none of my siblings live back there anymore. What do you guys think? Do you think that they're gonna try making this a pinnable type of afternoon? The really shitty thing is technically speaking, these areas here can be pinnable, okay? This area in here can be pinnable, and this area in here can be pinnable. So if they really don't want to extend or expand this. My thoughts were if they at the very least can clear that 6888, 6894 during this time and test it, which they did, but the reduction is quite clear, like that 13-point reduction here is quite clear, then they could at the very least bring it to 6897, 96, 99, but we could get capped around this area. Does that make sense? And considering we opened in a neutral zone for the real-time session, so opening at 6811, that increased the likelihood of staying stuck neutral. Does that make sense, guys? But what could help our odds? Even though the real-time open neutral, what could potentially help our odds? And remember what I said last time, those neutral spots, 6906, 6911, 6914, this is right now currently 130 points, by the way, from lows. So we're already hitting our 130 to 128 to 132 point ratios. Okay. What could help us today? So 132 points would basically break 6,900. $150 points, which is half of that 346. 256 brings us back to basically last week's open, which is 69.18. And then our 173 points off lows is what could get us back to the channel. What could help us, guys, in terms of where we opened? Remember, these are neutral spots are still linked with core ratios here. So use some logic. What do you guys think? So we didn't get the best real-time open, but it's a very calculated real-time open. What could help us for the duration of the session, though? Which also implies something. Two things. What's the first one that's working in our favor? Time isn't really working in our favor at this point. But this is something that can help you predict the timing that it could start working in our favor. I would say the 677, 6768, 6771 core hold. Okay. What else could be favorable for us? Maybe not the real-time open, but the and this is pretty insane because look at the session midpoint, like the midpoint for the session back at the 6894 area, and same with the timing back here at 1148. So it's pretty insane that these calculated times are basically bringing it right back to these points here. It was same thing with around that 1236. I don't know if you guys see that. The session open, you guys. Where did we open the actual session today? That could obviously work in our favor or help us a little bit. But with that being said, that would increase likelihood by what point in the day? Obviously relative to where you sustain. Okay. I could already tell the reductions when they started. So the first hold that was really good was the 683234. I really like the 6838 6841 hold here too, but I could already tell that that was a tiny reduction because I feel like if they really wanted to extend, they would have probably held closer to 3841. Okay. That would have been like that 8.25 ratio. Same thing back here. I feel like they would have held closer to, like instead of holding off of 4.8, I feel like they would have probably held closer to 5.758. Do you see it? Like these ratios here. Okay. So that's where I started noticing a tiny bit of slight reductions. Like a 5.758 hold would have been a little bit better for structure. Same with like a 6.866, like on the higher low or something like that. And this is likely what stalled us from getting into the zone early. Do you see it? Off these ratios here. Okay. So assuming they held closer to 5.8 instead, you would have had a bit of a better likelihood of getting these kind of structure breaks. Okay. Same with this here, maybe if they held closer to like 4.1, 4.2 here. Okay. Versus 3.2 or something like that. They're not terrible, but this is partially why they started getting these slight stalls, okay? And not like accelerated PA. This is when I started noticing that they're likely going to reduce range, especially here too when they came installed 6881. 6881 is an extremely calculated spot. I feel like this part right here, when they didn't fully push, and specifically after like not holdings like closer to 6858, 6866, which isn't a huge deal, but I feel like if they would have held closer to 6.6, like down here instead, okay, like this is likely why we're stalling these areas. Do you see what I'm saying, you guys, or not really? I hope you guys are seeing this. So like this is, had they held closer to like 6.6, okay? And that would have been if they had tested a little bit higher than 7.8 here, maybe closer to like 8.3, 8.4. So a lot of this is partially why they're stalling these areas here. Do you see it? Okay. but I think the extensions or the slight exhaustions mostly occurred there. And look, if you look at it from this angle here, and we clear this all out, the really big reduction, in my opinion, was this here, but obviously also this slight one here. So you could technically count this one here, but this is more of consolidation at this point now. Like, they're staying within that 12, 13 point range. This is where I started noticing probably the most reduction, and this is more linked with like 6922, 692726. Do you see it? And don't forget how calculated those spots are off the open. And a lot of that is based off how they reacted closer to 68.86, 68.94. And it's funny because, like, you can see it now with those reductions that they had. And this was those 52 to 55 point ratios here. And I said it this morning, 68, 26, 27 is huge. And I can even see it now with the reduction. Back in here and back in here. The only way I feel like they could have had like an expansion, so this is like if they would have expanded this any higher, it would have been if they did something like, you see this 13 point extension here? Okay, this is how they could have had those odds of getting, let's say, into the 6939, 6940. Do you see what I'm saying, you guys? And same thing, like how we said, or expansion. So expansion scenarios today would be, and I said this morning, 6939, 3842. You can see it though. This reduction here, this reduction here, this consolidation period here. These are all the reasons why they're not extending this. Okay, and there's another period here. And a lot of these are likely linked to basically the top of the channel. I feel like the top of the channel is probably the higher odd. Because this here was more of like the 8-8 stall off those like 29 point intervals. And this is why 6907 could maybe be more of where they could be taking this to. Okay, do you see that? Based off this morning stall and this current range, the neutral spot seems like it has the most confluence if they actually end up continuing this today, but with the conditions that they obviously have to hold here. Whereas if they had some crazy extensions this morning, you would have probably had much bigger breaks and likely right away versus these stalls. And I feel like that's the only way that they could have maybe pushed like 6961. Remember how I said we could have had those better structure breaks around 55? Like these areas here to 5.2 to 6.1 to 4.8, 3.9. All these ranges today are aligned with our structures. So 29.5. And these were some of the smaller ones. They weren't huge, but like I said, close to like, a lot of these were like close to 13 points, but this is when we were saying like 8.25, like had they just held a tiny bit higher. So a lot of it's not just on the downside, it's also like the structures of where they held. I think that gave us a total of like 86 to 99 points in overall reductions, which is quite a lot. But that's exactly how. Well, what's 86 and a half? 86.5 subtract that 8-point ratio. Yeah, that would make sense. If you subtract that, it's going to be closer to like 6.8, 6.987, 6.988. 86 and a half subtract 13, around 73 points. Those could have definitely triggered some of those core ranges, which is pretty insane. Does that make sense, you guys, if you're looking at it from that kind of a view? So like 29 and a half points, 27 and a half points. These are all just reductions that they've kept doing. So I would say at like a minimum, you could think that we've probably reduced at least like close to 70 points. Okay, so if we're looking at like a 70-point overall reduction potentially, assuming, let's say that, okay, I'm thinking 6907 is the most calculated spot for today, like this area here, but we'll see. Let's just measure off there just to see. But right now, if we're looking at it from here and we're just looking at like a basis of 70 points, it's pretty crazy that this is like a 55-point ratio here. Okay, because that's kind of like the ranges we looked at this morning. Off 70 points, I would imagine that these are going to be like close to those core spots again. 6968, 6967, 6977, 71. Okay. I'm thinking range is calculated more around the 07 spot. Okay, which would probably more closely align with our last week's highs. Does that make sense, you guys? I'm looking at this from like an overall reduction basis. These are based on reductions off both stalls and clearance breaks, and how and why these could have netted the following expansion scenarios we discussed this morning. It's good to see if the math actually makes sense once you look at it again. Okay? And that would make sense too, because that would basically take out this. So that makes a lot of sense. Like they might not be fully prepared to take out this, but they could take out that. Does that make sense? That's why they could maybe stall 6877 versus fully taking out those ranges. And that would basically be what, a 3-day engulfing, or not 3-day, 2-day? I guess not even a 2-day. I guess these are like 1.5-day ratios, but you just can't see them. Or maybe like a real-time session engulfing instead. Because the high on the 26th, okay, where is it? It occurred overnight. Okay, so do you guys see this? Like these highs right here, like this occurred in pre-market. Okay, this occurred overnight. So it would still be, that'd be like more of like a real time break off like a 2-3 day. Why aren't my settings coming up? That's strange. What I found the most impressive though so far is the fact that this aligns with 173 points back in here to our 4-1, and the fact that this open basically aligns back to 6993, and then today's real-time open aligns back with last week's highs. Okay, and this is based off 6820, 6811 for real-time open to session open, which is linked back to last week's highs. Okay, let's see. I had some odds during this period here, at least for, they did a decent job of trying to get back over 68992, but it's more of that 9496 wall that they have to try engaging with. Otherwise, this is when they really could just start making this the pinnable afternoon, unfortunately. I put up a poll if you guys want to vote on that. So far, this is still like relatively okay price action. It's just more of like consolidation than it is anything else. It hasn't really accelerated yet, but it hasn't done that on either end. I do think though that in terms of like wider range, like this definitely would need to sustain that 7-1-7-8 area. Otherwise, that's where the short can start to accelerate. There is higher, or there are, sorry, higher odds closer to this period here. So I'm wondering if this is more of a delay than anything else. If this wasn't a calculated period, then I wouldn't really feel like this is as much of a consolidation, but because odds are higher during this time, they could just be stalling right now. So we'll have to see. But like I said, I would prefer that they hold closer to like these ranges than here. I wouldn't really want this going back beneath here, let's say. I feel like that would really make this pinnable. Can we get more votes, guys, than just like 3 people? So I'm not saying that it's great that they're doing a reversal at this period, but if they're going to come back, this would be the better period to do it versus back in here. But that being said, that does put more pressure for, you know, them to try sustaining these ranges here before this period here, because this period here is where it really needs to try retracting 9.2, 9.4, 9.6 to try maybe extending during that period. So we'll see what ends up happening here. If they end up just kind of keeping this stuck in this range, then it could just be very pinnable. If they break range, that's when this becomes more of a short, okay? I feel like this is more pinnable though, but we'll see. There were some odds that reopen up again just before 2 that I'm watching for, so I didn't really have too many odds around this period, but I normally do watch the 204, 207, 208, so we can just keep an eye on it anyway. But I do feel like this is more of a delay than anything else. Is there news on this stick, you guys, or is it just... That's a good retest of 60, 68, 88. I haven't really seen anything. This was the last thing that I saw. Okay, majority voted 69.08 to 69.12. That's what I voted for too. But like I said, that the only way that that could be the case is I would say if they for sure hold above this 7 8. I feel like holding over 8 1 would be even more ideal, but and then retracting back over into the zone and getting back into these pots here around this point in time. That would give us the odds of getting these kind of structure breaks. That could still mean that they could break this after the bell, but maybe more so for like the after hours session than anything else. So we'll see what they do over the next, what time is it? The next hour. Off highs here, guys, they've moved 21.5 points, so almost 22 points. It's that 21.5 point ratio so far. And from a risk perspective, they're still about 13 points on each end. I would be more concerned if they failed the 7-1 area in terms of like an accelerated short, but holding closer to here would be a little bit better, specifically at these points in the day. What time is it? So 1:48, getting that break back over 6881. We'll see if they have enough momentum to get this back in the zone. Probably before 2. But do you guys see how this is kind of a... So you don't really get bigger breaks until I would say this area breaks down, and it's kind of the same thing here. You're not going to really accelerate until this area breaks up. Okay, this is probably closer to that 6906. All right, and off the zone, it's probably closer to where they're capping us here in terms of where they stalled. What do you guys think? You think they can push back into the zone here in the next minute or two, or you think that they're stalling this? My trading view is being so shitty lately. Yeah, there's not that much time, but and technically they could still break it before 2. So far this is really just delaying the next leg though. Like I said, if they do it a minute late, I would think that that's probably going to imply some volatility. So let's just see if they get structure breaks in these next 2-3 minutes. Oh, there's just way too many racist people in there. And it's not really racist, actually. Islamophobic is probably the better term. Do you guys see here, though, that this is pretty much equal in, like, risk? I guess if we look at it based on last week's close, which was closer to here, it's almost identical. So they're basically battling between going back to weekly or trying to break back into the zone here is what it looks like. And this is where premiums start to really die off, especially for dailies. They do have higher odds though during this period though, so I guess we'll have to wait and see. I added a bit of an extension here. Let's vote real quick. What side do you guys think gets triggered here first? 7-4 or 8-8? They're gonna definitely try taking out one or the other, and I think probably by that 2 o'clock period, because otherwise they're gonna keep this stuck for another 35 to 55 minutes. What do you guys think? No, it's not a poll. I'm just asking. The only thing I didn't like is that they stalled. So there's something I did notice here, though. Okay, you see here how they stalled 9-4 by like 2 points or so? This area here, and specifically around that 133, 132 period. I did notice that, but I feel like they offset it slightly by also sustaining like this area here. by a few points, and then also testing 8788. So this is very, 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 very conflicted in these ranges, which usually is a sign of pinnable price action, which I know you guys hate that word. I know you guys hate hearing me say that, but I knew that if they didn't clear these areas like before mid-session, that they could end up making them pinnable if they're cleared during mid-session, which ended up being the case. And it wasn't a proper clearance because they didn't sustain over 88, 94, 92, which is what ends up causing this kind of PA. You can see a lot of the back and forth. I'm just going to delete some of these though, because I'm trying my best to not let the charts get cluttered. So worst case scenario this afternoon is if they kind of just keep it stuck in this box, okay, for a minimum of a half an hour, potentially a max of an hour, okay? Where's that time box? So maybe like a minimum of like, oh, actually like after 2, if they don't break during these periods, yeah, like around 35, 36 minutes, potentially up to an hour, okay? And so far off the 48 period, they've already stalled. So they have some odds that they could try turning this back around in the next few minutes, but they'd really have to act quick for this period to even have any sort of odds of getting like these hive day retests. So far, it doesn't seem like that's the case. So what do you guys think? Come on, there's like 30 plus people watching. Which end do you think breaks? Or do you think that they don't break either end and they just keep this delayed? So the worst case scenario would be this, which would basically be neutral. This downside break would also give us those odds of retesting 68, 58, 68, 66, and potentially the channel. That downside scenario makes it so that this area here is likely pinnable. Could you trigger both ends and then still end up going neutral? So in other words, could you trigger 8-8 before 2 and 7-4 before 2 and then still end up just staying sideways? Also, I know I said 2, but it's more closer to like 204, 207, 208. So far they've triggered 6, 6, 8, 7, 6. Well, we didn't really have proper structure breaks. Like I was saying earlier, holding off of 5-8 would have been better than holding off of 4-8, 5-2. So theoretically speaking, these areas here would be better support, like like they could technically hold 6-6, 6-8, and then still have an upside break. Okay, do you see what I'm saying? Going back to the 50s would be the worst case, actually. The 50s doesn't really do anything for us. 6-6 to 6-8 is a little bit more calculated based on what they already did and based off the ranges that they're kind of moving in. Also, failing these areas here is failing those 22-point ratios, so this would be more of like sustaining a 32, 33-point break. Does that make sense? Whereas getting here, you're basically at risk of, at that point, breaking 44-point intervals. All right, so far they're trying to sustain the line here. We'll see what ends up happening. The odds are closer to 204 to 207 for some sort of structure break. And the RR is closer to, like I said, I think these ranges here. If they break, if they keep this neutralized, it's basically in the 80s and like upper 70s.
If I see another
Someone was saying earlier that SPX engulfed by a few points. SPY 2. I think SPY hit 687. Yeah, it did. It would be interesting if those ended like at the money into the close or something. All right, let's see who's gonna win. Those are good sticks here ahead of 207. I feel like they'd have to get at least over 688, 384 for this to be more probable for that 207 period. Do you see what they're doing, you guys? I can't set my alerts. I don't know why this thing is not... It's not letting me edit or fix any of these for some reason. Oh, I probably actually have them down here. I mean, close enough. What time is it? What is 207? I don't know. I'm starting to think that they really would have to move that really quick. This almost seems like they're going to keep it stuck with a slightly bullish neutral kind of stance. But if they can take out 8.3, 8.4, then I think there's a decent odd that they can get that retest of 8.7, 8.8. I guess we'll see here. Maybe some mid extensions too around like technically you could watch around 210, 212, but I feel like delaying much more than 208, at least for an 8.7 retest, is going to make it so that this is highly likely that they're going to keep this more pinnable, okay? The reason why I put like a very small window for time pressure and constraints is to see just how, what's the word? Not volatile, I guess momentum this actually still has. So that's not bad. It's still taking that 8.4. We'll see what kind of follow-through action this gets here. But you can see that usually when you get stalls like that at specific points in the day where it's more momentum driven, it kind of just immediately dies off. And we'll see if they get the 30-second turnaround. Ideally, what you want to do though is for sure at least get there before that 235, 236 window. I feel like that's kind of pushing it though, because this is more so for the 9.4, 9.6 retest at that point, or the earliest odds for like retesting highs. So not even getting into the zone at this point would kind of be the worst case scenario, I think. I didn't do any calculated points, but I guess off of like the failed structure breakdowns off like 136 and 235, so 60 bars, this would be approximately the midpoint right here. And then from the point in time that they stalled 4.4 or 8.8, that's 53 minutes, 53 bars. So that would make this the midpoint, right? Did you guys see that? From the point in time that they actually retested. What's 53 divided by 2, guys? If you're going to measure the midpoint in time, off the last stalled 68, 88 break and our calculated points in the day around 235, 236 would be 26.5 minutes. So this point here, that's pretty cool. Do you see that? That's really, really, really cool. And if you want to do quarterly lots, you could maybe measure from here to here, but I do think that that's still going to end up resulting in like this being the midpoint, 26, 27 minutes. Yeah, it is. So then these are also probably 26, 27 minutes apart. Yeah, they are. These are calculated times of day then. I didn't calculate these midpoints earlier. Calculated midpoints. I kind of just measured it off of the typical points, but this is more calculated based off the time that they actually tested, 8-8. Okay, so we can manually measure maybe 26 and 27 minute intervals, guys. If you want to measure midpoints between here and here, like a quarterly midpoint, then you could just measure the median range between 26 and a half, so like 13 to 14 minutes. Okay. So around 222, 223. Okay. Okay. Can you guys hear me? I think my thoughts will be, considering they got these zone breaks here at this midpoint, we definitely have odds to retest high of day by that 236, 235. But if they're able to do it, considering they're already retesting 9.2 here, because my goal was to retest 9.4, 9.6 by this point. If they're able to do that by this point in time here, okay, then we have odds on the table still of getting the 69, like 08, 69, 12, 69, 14, okay? And then relative to the PA that happens during these times, we'll kind of decipher there whether or not we're actually going to maybe get 69, 20s today or not. Does that sound good? I don't know if anyone tried those 687 calls. I said I think those will probably be at the money back down here. Those have already doubled. 6896 being retested here early on. This is giving very high odds to get some extended ranges today. High a day retest here and break. These are the 13-minute breaks off that low right here on that hold at 202. Market seems to be moving in 13.5 to 14-minute intervals if you guys want to manually measure these. Okay, this would be the 13.5-minute interval off the sustainment stick here at 202. So if they snap this area here, then I'm thinking maybe they could trigger that 6907 off these points. That'll give us the highest odds of getting 6920s today. Yeah, that's the only, like, I don't really consider that a day trade. I guess I took the calls this morning, but like a short-term trade, this is the only short-term trade I took. I took some 687 SPY calls off that 7-8 hold here with a stop. I wasn't expecting them to rip like this though. I actually felt like they could maybe delay that a little bit closer to like 222, 230. But now I'm regretting only getting 4 contracts. How much range have they moved off downside here? This is the 14-minute bar right here, guys. How much range is this? If this breaks over 33 to 32 points, this is where this could really extend. So, and that makes sense because that would be our 6909, 6907, 6910, whatever you want to call it. And specifically off these intervals here too. So these are some other points in time that, oops. Damn it, why does that keep happening? I think this offset here by holding 7-4 really helped in terms of not getting that breakdown to that 6-6 mark. Because who was saying that that this could go to the 50s? The one thing is this going to the 50s, that doesn't do anything for us. That would have made it so that this does nothing. Does that make sense? And you don't want to do nothing. Whereas going to 6668 could have still given us an odd of at least retesting high of day. Maybe not getting like the 6906, 08, 12, but at least getting a high of day retest, or giving us a better odd of at least getting a decent pin back at 6874, 6881, 6888, 6894. Does that make sense? Whereas so like shorts and longs, you guys, sometimes they're also dynamic. So you have to think about it. Okay, if there's only an hour and a half left in the day, why would they want to take it to 6850s if today is a very important day to pin the close, right? Is the 3rd a huge flip this week? Yes, okay. Is today's closing price very important in terms of essentially getting back to all-time highs at some point, or at least our 69 58, 69, 66 potential retests for mid-quarter? Yeah, a deeper pullback in this case wouldn't work because they already basically not ruined structure, but like I would have preferred back in here that they held 5-8. I would have preferred back in here that they held 4-1. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's not that it would have been bad. It's just that based on how they were already moving in these kind of ratios, okay, like we could afford some risk here, but I don't really think it would have been the best case if they brought it back to the 50s. Okay, if we measure off where they actually held, it's closer to like 11 points. Okay, so like maybe closer to like here. So you'd be better off sustaining closer to that area there. Do you see it? Yeah, but then I think it would have been pinnable. I don't think that would have given us odds to expand though. This is giving us odds to expand, not breaking or testing 7-4. If that makes sense, Bill. Like getting 690506 specifically before these calculated times of day is giving us odd for those 6920s. And potentially 6938. I know it sounds crazy, but we still had odds of getting those ranges today. Or at the very least, making it so that these areas are pinnable. Does that make sense? Like 6912, 6916. And a lot of it's going to be based on if they can trigger this 690709. These very calculated areas. Let me just mark them, okay? These areas here. And depending what time of day they do that at. So if they're doing them now, look at these. These are off the midpoints. That gives you insane odds of getting 69.26. Okay, let me just focus, guys, because I want to get the best exits. I don't want to get a shitty exit. I want to fully maximize off this. And that's I should have done SPX. That would anyone do SPX on that? I did SPY 687s, but I feel like SPX on that would have been insane. These are the calculated midpoints, guys, at 222, 224. 6907 being tested here. 6907 being tested at 222, 224 p.m. gives high odds of expanding this afternoon, okay, to 6920. 6926 is the bigger overhead that we discussed this morning. We'll see what happens over the next 10-15 minutes before looking at 6938. I still have all my calls for tomorrow, though. I didn't cover anything for tomorrow yet that I took off that 4852. And the reason being is because we had those odds of getting 6970s by tomorrow. What do you guys think? You think that they can break this 6907 spot here? This is a pretty big point. This area here, 06, 07, 08. Who voted 6908, 6912 for range? That's what I voted for. But I really want to see how this trades here, though, because this is a huge spot. But now I'm being greedy, because now I want 6920s instead. I guess we'll find out based on how this this reacts at these price points here. We can watch around 230, 232 because those are usually generic points in the day. But the actual calculated time is 235, 236. This point in the day is linked to session lows. Okay? If this is linked to session lows, this could be what? So these periods here, okay? Here and here are linked to session lows. Okay, so what could these periods here end up being? And I actually haven't done this, but I want to see one thing. Can you guys let me know if that breaks down at all? Because my alerts are not working. I just want to see. So based on the point that they actually triggered here, this took about, oh, that's insane. That also took about 12, 13 minutes. So, okay, we'll just say around 12 minutes. Okay. So 12 minutes. Let's see. That would make sense because these are the calculated points. So could these also be potential early highs of day? Do you see it? Do you get what I'm saying? In correlation to those calculated points. These have the highest odds of maybe being highs of day today. Okay? If this is kind of based off, you see how they started to bottom back here? And then they finally bottomed 12 minutes afterwards? That is directly correlated to these times here at 222, 224. Does that make sense? This is and look at the price that it's doing it at. Do you guys know how insane that is? Do you know what kind of level of like analysis that takes to align that time and price? Sorry, not 6899, 6909. That is insane, okay? Because this is correlated with session lows, okay? At 67, 68, 67, 71. Is everyone on the same page? They took 12 minutes down here to bottom. Okay, so, and this is a calculated price point. Okay, this is also, in case you guys forgot, okay, off lows. We talked about these being core ratios earlier. These are core ratios right now that they're testing. These are also like the 134, 135 point ranges. Off of today's opening range, which was 68.11. These are those 96, 98 point ratios we were talking about. Off of 68.20, I'm pretty sure these are the 88 point ratios. Yeah, they are. Okay, so this took 12 minutes to bottom here, meaning if this does not push, okay, by this point in time, our high is the high of day in. I'm teaching you something that I swear to God no one else is going to teach you. If they don't clear the 690708, this area here around this point, do you guys think that the highs are in? Yes, okay. If they clear around this point here, could they expand highs at this point here? Maybe back to last week's OR. Yes, okay. This 259, 258, 3 o'clock had my highest odds of being high of day today, this area here, okay? All of that is going to be relative to how price reacts during this period here. And I guess we could still use that 12 minutes for after 235. I think that's going to align with this 247, 248 period that we had. So this is for sure another calculated period, and all of this makes sense because this is probably 12 minutes here too. That makes sense now why that was working in 12, 13, 26 minute intervals. That's crazy. 13 times 2, 26, right? Sorry, 26 times 2. Do you see it? That's why this took 26 minutes. That's why this break took 12, 13 minutes. That's why this is aligned with 12, 13 minutes. Same with this here. That's why this is 26 minutes. Isn't that insane? I haven't actually looked at the time frames of those because those are obviously calculated times, so that's a bit different than using an actual time frame. But I mean, we could watch the 12 minute just to see. So 12 minutes on its third bar. So from an expansion basis, that makes sense because 236 would be the period that it could expand or exhaust. So between 236, 248. On a 13 minute, same idea, between 235, 248. That's crazy. So these 12, 13 minutes are expansion periods. Potential expansion / exhaustion periods, and right off our 6907, 6908. That's pretty wild, you guys. I'm actually thoroughly impressed. If you really want to study time analysis, this is a good session to go back and review. What about that 26 to 27 minute period? Also 248. So these ones could be scary because this is where they could reverse if they don't push high enough before 248. Does that make sense? So that 235 to, can someone write that in the chat? 235 to 248 is an expansion / exhaustion period. Izzy thinks if they push the 6907, 6910 area during that point in time, they could continue pushing through 248 and 3 o'clock. We'll watch 242 and the median between 242 and 248. That's kind of calculated around maybe like 246, 47. And then we're going to look at that. What did we say that other time frame was? $53 minutes or something like that. 53 minute flips at 312. We'll watch between. This is probably 248. What's the median, guys? I need someone to calculate this between 248 and 312. Just real quick, because I have too many positions on. So the midpoint between 312 and 248. I'm assuming it's going to be our calculated points, but that's probably that 25, 26 minute period. 24, so It is, yeah. Okay, that is for sure calculated then. That's around that 2:59, 3 o'clock. 2:30 testing 69.10. So these are the points here that's going to give us an idea whether or not they're going to really expand or exhaust this period. Technically speaking, if they break ahead, that'll give us very high odds of expansion during this period. If they kind of digest right here, so because technically they can afford to digest a little bit before breaking, that could still give us odds of going like this during this period and then pushing after 248. Okay. Are you guys okay if I mute myself for a bit while I manage my own positions? Because I took some contracts that expire into the close. All right, what do you guys think? 235, 236, extremely calculated points in the day. 69.07, 09, 11 are really the overheads that can push us to those 69.20s. Specifically if they clear them at this point in the day. I want to see if we can tag at least, I would say 69.11. This area here. And I don't know why this shouldn't be blue. This should be yellow up until 14. What happened to my... I'll fix that later, but this is still a neutral zone, so I don't know why that's blue. I don't know how that got changed. Maybe, oh, it's missing that. That doesn't look right though. Why does that look weird? Come on, what do you guys think? You think that they have enough momentum here to take out this 69.09, 69.11 by that 236 time frame? This period here is linked to session lows. And these are extremely calculated price points, so they're really going to give us the idea on whether or not markets actually want to push 69.11 today and get some extended breaks to 69.14, 18, or whether or not they would rather just stall. So remember, these are our calculated spots from this morning. I'm just going to copy paste this. You guys can go back and review, but a minute late, guys, can imply volatility, so just be mindful of that, because between 235 and 248 is the potential expansion / exhaustion period, okay? So this would be the period here if they want to decide if they want to expand or exhaust this. And a lot of this can be looked at from a structural perspective on a 12, 13-minute chart, because one, it aligns with our times, and two, it aligns with my theory that the fourth bar usually expands or exhausts. Okay, so we're going to watch these time frames here, and you can see the really nice exhaustion and negation of that 12-minute 3-bar down here too. So these are also some good structures that you could just go back and use if you wanted to. Same with the 11-minute. 11 minutes actually a really clean one too, and does a good job of showing some midpoints. So like the 4-3, if you wanted to just use structural based charts versus anything else. 10 minutes really clean too. This is the fourth bar, so kind of gives you an idea that maybe they start exhausting closer or expanding closer to 240, 243. I would imagine that we probably have some flags that form too. Maybe on like a small time frame, like I don't know. I figured there would be one on like a 6-minute. Maybe it's off like a 6.5. I feel like there's so many half frames that we can't really see. This was a negated downside reversal, because you see that, okay, look at this. You see how they tried breaking that range almost right away? It's to try preventing some of these from having a nasty star-like reversal on the pullback. Same with that one there. Same with this one here. This one is still a pretty ugly star, so that 240 to 243 period is important. So I would say since this flips at 241, we have to watch 240. 240 is a multi-flip on a lot of these time frames. And that's probably the median point between that 248, 247, and 235 window. You can kind of see here. And this is going to give us an idea too if they really want to expand this or if they're going to try exhausting. So just be very, very cautious. These are definitely enough to be considered max ranges for the session today. Oh, that's a good time frame too, because that's 258, 259 is the calculated time. So that would also make sense from that kind of logic too. I want to see what those 51, 52 minute, 53 minutes look like, just because those ones were also kind of correlated to that. You can kind of see. So 240, very important, I think, in terms of seeing if they actually want to exhaust this here or continue. 240, I'm going to watch this period here. These are the calculated times, but these are on the smaller structures, okay? Also, can you still expand post 248? Yes, okay, especially if you don't exhaust during that period, because our really, really, really calculated point is between 2:59 and 3 p.m., okay? So if they don't really, remember how I said if they could still technically do not nothing, but like at least at the very least they have to test 69.11, which they did do. Okay, they did test 69.11. We hit 69.11.25, I think. That was the minimum condition, but I think they have to still sustain this area, okay? So it's more about sustainment if they want to continue this after this period here and then continue to get those structure breaks. Does that make sense? And that wouldn't really be a structural expansion. That's just based off this being a calculated time of day that's linked to today's lows. And then from there, I'll probably just manage my contracts for tomorrow because I know that there's odds that they could, if they push 69.18, 69.22, that they could get this to the channel, but considering there's an hour left, but I just don't want to be stuck with them potentially making it pinnable. Because could they easily make this pinnable into this close if they, let's say, take out these ranges here? Could they end up making it so that these areas are pinnable into the close like this? Especially if they don't want to continue pushing like this. What do you guys think? Yes, if they don't push the 20s at all, then this would be like kind of like the neutral kind of pinnable scenario, which I wouldn't really say is bearish, but it's kind of just pinning it like in the lower part of the zone. And a lot of this is going to be relative to what they do over the next 15 minutes here. Okay? Do we have anything at 3? When I checked last, there was nothing, but that is a very calculated time, so. Can you guys see how evident it is that 69.11 is an extreme overhead? Definitely a good spot to have covered some if you wanted to, specifically between this 235, 236 to 248 period. I think the fact that they tested it still keeps odds open for them getting some continued breaks here, but I do think that sustainment's going to play a big factor though. So we'll see if they can hold the line. I want to see how much range they've taken down so far. So far, 6.75 points. I want to see if it's linked to last week's. Yeah, it is. So far, the reduction in range is linked to last week's open, okay? Which was 69.18. What do you guys think? Who here still thinks that we have some momentum to take out 69.11? 69.14? So 69.11, 69.14, 69.18 to 69, maybe 21, 69.22 to 69.26, 69.26 plus. I'll set that for 5 minutes. I'm going to shade this in yellow just because these are pretty important times here. And mostly because there's a lot of structures that form some really nasty bear flags that could negate, but they could negate and also make some potential flags, okay? So I'm more concerned about this one on the 17-minute that runs all the way through till 258. So this going green, I think, would be important because I don't think this time frame took out the highs yet. Does that make sense, you guys? From a structure basis, like on these ones, these took out the highs, so they're not Not that they're not concerning, because obviously they can engulf, but they typically can give at least a better odd of getting some retracements back. So around 247, 248 would be important. This one has till 258, so far stuck in an inside bar. This one has till 3. So I know that this period is... This just feels like a period that's deciding whether or not we're hitting max range or high of day. Does it not? Like when you're looking at this price action at these price points, this is exactly what it should feel like. Like you guys have to start getting a better sense of how the market should feel at specific price points at specific times. Okay, so these points in times, if they're linked to potentially being calculated max ranges, areas that the market could expand or exhaust, potentially the high of day, okay? That's how it should feel like when you're trading at these points in time and price. Is that what this feels like here to you guys in comparison to the rest of the session? 247 getting a retest of 69.08, 69.09. 248 is a pretty important time of day here to see if they give us a 69.09, 69.11 retest. It shouldn't feel like that. If they were waiting for end of day, they wouldn't have ripped 34 points though before end of day. Do you get what I'm saying? This is the move though. This would be the period that's going to decide whether or not they actually want to extend the move. This 248 being at 69.07 is extremely calculated. Could someone write that down, please? I feel like that would be the minimum condition to be met at that time to keep these odds in play. But I do want to see if they can at least try retesting the 69.11 during this period here. Ideally before 258. I feel like if they waited all the way till 258, that's, or 259, sorry, that's going to be quite a delay, and I think that's what would end up making this more pinnable and where they could start to slow down the acceleration of the range that we're working with. Can we get more votes, guys, please? I set that for 5 minutes. Only like 4 or 5 people voted. This is the period that I'm more concerned about in terms of stalling. Okay, specifically ahead of 2:59, 3 o'clock. So what's the most important thing to have happen during this time frame between 2:48 and I would say 2:58 p.m.? What do you have to have happen during this period here? Yeah, I think sustainment here is really, really important. Even if they don't take out the 69.11 high, at least trying to sustain between these ranges of like 69.06, 69.07, 69.08. Testing these areas here before then would be the best case scenario, because that would give us an odd to do what by 2:58, 2:59, 3 o'clock. And maybe through this extended period here. I kind of stopped measuring, but I mean, if you guys want to manually mark these, you could. Yeah, or expanding, right? So let's see. I marked 254 just because it's kind of the midpoint between here. But it's really mostly that because there's actual flips that occurred, not calculated times, but flips at 2:58 today. I guess we could watch 2:57, but it's really that 2:59 and 3 o'clock window. So for instance, if they retest by 2:54, okay, 2:55 or something like that, that's going to really give some good odds for this window here to expand and retest last week's open and close, right? Last week's open, wasn't last week's close 69.20? Or am I crazy? Wasn't it 69.22? I swear it was. What was that one close? Where was it? Yes, this. That was Friday. Oh, 24. Okay, yes. So these are very correlated to those prior weekly closing points. Okay? So it makes sense. So like not just from like the fact that 2:58, 2:59, 3 o'clock is linked to session lows and expanding, but also relative to maybe getting some structural breaks above last week's open, last week's close. Does that make sense? Could really make it so that what? Think about it. What could that mean for the week? And this is a very calculated spot for the week, by the way. These are also our 150, 151 point ratios. What could that mean for the week? If they do this at this specific point in time and price, what could that mean for the week? And it's only Monday. So making this statement now would be a bold statement, but what could that mean for the week? And this is how micro time analysis and price analysis could help you predict how the remainder of the week could go. And 6771, 6778 was a very, very, very strong support that I had on the weekly report. So think about it. Just very, 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 very simplified. What could that mean for the week if they clear these areas, break at these points in time? Forget a reset and a push higher. We could go higher. That's not really... No, just think about it. What could that put for the week? What could that mean for the week? It's not about expansion. Market could go higher. That's very easy to predict. What's something that's not very easy to predict with this kind of news that's going on? Okay, with it only being Monday. And NFP. No, predicting upside or all-time highs is not hard to predict. What's harder to predict? As early as Monday. You have 4 days to keep going up. That's not that hard. You have geopolitical risk. What would be a very, very, very bold statement to make on Monday? You guys are thinking wrong. You guys are just thinking upside. Yes, okay? Striker band's on the right page. That could imply that what? And not many people would make bold statements like this with a week like this, with that kind of news that's going on this early into the week. What would be a very bold thing to assume? Lows are in. Yes. Do you understand the correlation? Kind of like when you have midweek retracements, okay? This would be like an early week retracement of prior week's open close off a very calculated spot. 6771, 6768 is extremely calculated. Do you think many people would be brave enough to say that, okay, lows are in for the week on Monday after the kind of news we just had? With there being unforeseen catalyst or... Does that make sense? And then at the second part, you guys are right, okay? So, yes, if we say that the lows are in for the week and they get back over 69.20s, at that point, it's very, 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 very easy to assume that we're going to retest 6978, 6984, 7,000, 7020. Do you get what I'm saying? That's not very difficult at that point because then you're getting a proper structure clearance break, and those areas are core ranges that are calculated back to these price points. The tougher part is making the assumption that the lows are in for the entire week, okay? I need someone to document the price point at 259 and 3 because these are essentially what's going to give us an idea if they're going to cap the range for the session and make this pinnable, or whether they want to continue this until session close. Because if they can at least get back over 69.09, 69.11 at this point in time, then it gives us some odds to keep this durational till session close, okay? Where's Josh? That is when they would maybe wait for end of day move. But it's going to be calculated based off this point in time. So these points here determine whether that's even the case. So we really want to see if they're willing to at least sustain these ranges here, or if they're going to decide that they want to start capping range. They would probably start doing that at this point in time because this is linked to session lows, which is also linked to session close. And these are very calculated price points that are definitely enough to be considered a max range for the week or for the session. Is 69.08, 69.11 enough to be considered potentially a max range for today's session? At least real-time session. I was saying, Josh, that like these areas here determine whether or not they want to keep this durational into close. So at a minimum, where would you want to close at 3 to at least give you an odd of keeping this durational until 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. Because otherwise this is where it can start to get extremely heavy. What do you guys think? Do you see these reductions here? That would have been enough to get you a 69.11 retest. This is where I would probably start using a tiny bit more caution, just because stalling these ranges here is when they could start deciding that maybe they want to start capping some of the range into the close. And it's not necessarily like a terrible thing. These are pretty pinnable areas, to be honest, but it's mostly to see whether or not they want to extend or expand or maybe limit us a little bit. Sometimes if they want to limit us to like, let's say 69, 14, 18 for real time, then they have to start being more strategic with how they move price around here. Does that make sense? Because it could be that 8.25 to 10 points we talked about this morning. So if there's only X amount of range left in the session, then they have an entire hour to go, then they have to kind of utilize range a little bit better. And in doing so, they would have to basically stall 69.11. Okay, but 69.11 being met, I think can at least keep those odds in play for end of session today. Okay, I think I'm going to take a bit of a break, guys, because I am fasting, so I don't want to get like overly dehydrated, but maybe I'll be back for like the last 15-20 minutes just to kind of see how they end up closing this for an end of session stream. You should have mostly been scaling out off the 6, 9, 0, 7, 0, 8, 11 just because they are really big overheads, and you could leave runners in the event that they get some late day breaks to 69, 14, 18. These I figured would be potential max range for the session today, and really relative to what they do around these points in time. Okay. All right, I will catch up with you guys in like half an hour.